Alright, the Vegan Cyclist is about to talk to you a little bit about interval training, but before he gets started, I just want to say that interval training is not a one-size-fits-all thing. There are a lot of nuances that come with creating an individualized training program, and it really depends on every individual, and depends on their training history, experience, goals, and a whole lot of other things. So just keep that in mind, and here's Tyler.
Hey, VC here. Today we're talking about interval training. We're gonna break it up into 4 parts, which is why intervals, how to structure your actual workouts, as in warm up, cool down, on efforts, off efforts, how often you should do them, when in your year should you put interval training. Now, before we jump into this, if you don't have a power meter, interval training is gonna be a little bit difficult. You can do it with a heart rate, that's fine. It's a little laggy, and you definitely need to know your zones. I have linked how to get your power zones and how to get your heart rate zones down in the description. If you don't know what your zones are, you're gonna need to figure that out, because without your zones, it is pointless to do intervals. It would be like going to the gym and you're gonna lift 35 pounds 10 times, but the weights don't have any numbers on them. Or if you have wrong zones, you could be lifting a weight that says 35 pounds, but really it's 55 pounds. I'll really quickly say this, that if you don't have any power or heart rate, you have no metrics whatsoever, you can do these 2 things. 1, you can do super high intensity intervals, like 40-20s, which 40 seconds, basically flat out sprint, 20 seconds coast. You do that 4 times, 2 sets, a 5-minute rest in between those 2 sets. That doesn't require anything because there's no pacing whatsoever. Just go really hard for 40 seconds and not for 20. Do that 4 times and you've got yourself a good set of intervals that you don't need heart rate or power for. You can also do 30 by 30s, 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off for 10 minutes. You do that usually twice, with about a 5 to 10 minute recovery in between those 2 sets. This, you also don't necessarily need power or heart rate because the on effort is very hard. You would stay seated during the effort. You don't need to stand and sprint. It's just like almost as hard as you can go seated, and then the off 30 seconds is conversational recovery, but you're still pedaling, you're still putting pressure on the pedals. Those 2 workouts would be phenomenal or doable without any sort of power or heart rate or any metrics whatsoever. So let's get into, first of all, why interval training. One of the biggest things for me that interval training is great for is time requirement. You can get a lot out of an hour if you're doing structured interval training versus just going out and noodling around or riding or guessing at it. I've used this analogy before, but if you're not doing any sort of structured training, it's just you're making a shotgun blast at a target, and so obviously if you increase your volume, you're increasing your bullets, right? And you're going to increase the quality of training. But if you don't have that time, if you have very little time, 4 to 8 hours a week, interval training is going to be almost mandatory for you to really make any big significant gains. But here's why it's going to help you out big time. I can do 380 watts, 370 watts for 20 minutes. To go out and do 370 watts for 20 minutes would be I would need to be tapered, I'd need to be fresh. It's gonna take a lot out of me, not just physically, but mentally, to do that effort. So when I do intervals, let's say I do 5-minute intervals, I'll do them between 360 and 380. That's like my window, right? Usually aiming to hit around 370 to 380 on my 5-minute window. I do a 2.5-minute recovery and I do that 5-minute interval again. Since I can hold 370 for 20 minutes, holding it for 5 minutes doesn't feel absolutely horrible. But what's gonna happen is I'll probably do 5 to 7 sets of that. So ultimately, what I'm looking to do is to produce a level of power longer, more time in that zone than I would if I just went out and straight did 20 minutes or 30 minutes. Like there's no way I could do 30 minutes at 370. But if I do it in intervals, there's a good chance I can actually have a total amount of time at that power level or in that zone. This is gonna work from your whole entire power curve. The amount of time that I can spend at 1,000 watts is very small, but if I break that up into intervals, I can actually have in the workout a very large amount of time in that zone. But so the idea is that I'll be able to overreach and put myself into a point of adaptation where I'm stressing my motor more than I could usually do. If you wanted to do, say, 300 watts for 20 minutes, that was like a goal of yours. That's where you would like to achieve. And right now you can only do 270. Intervals are gonna help you bridge that gap by you going out and doing 300 watts for 5 minutes, 5 to 7 times, because your total amount of time is actually getting there. So you're overreaching, you're stressing your motor, you're adapting. And I gotta throw in a caveat here, which is everyone is different. Everyone's needs are different. There is no one workout that is an absolute game changer for everyone. So I'm gonna throw out some basic ideas here, but it's not a one-shot kill for everyone. But if you don't have a coach and you're not super serious about training, you just wanna dabble in it, this will help you out. For my training program, sort of seems to be the rule of thumb is a 2-to-1 ratio. I'm going to have my on effort twice as long as my recovery effort. If I'm doing 5 minutes, I'm going to do about 2.5 minutes off. I might do 4 minutes on and 2 minutes off, or I might do 8 minutes on and 4 minutes off. It's gonna help your body learn how to buffer lactic acid. It's gonna learn how to recover under stress. Because if you do it the other way, or if you have equal or even greater recovery during your efforts, you can do it. And I have a workout that I really like, which is 3 minutes on and like 3 to 5 minutes off. But that 3 minutes is just, right? And the idea is to bump my ceiling. And so I'm gonna do that interval about 5 times, 3 to 5 times. But it is making sure that my power is way overreaching. Like I'm trying to almost hit power records during that 3-minute session. And I'm having adequate rest. I'm fully recovering. But that's not really race applicable. I'm not going to be able to fully recover during a race. For the most part, it's not about what kind of power you can put out fresh. It's about what kind of power you can put out not fresh. So learning how to put out power once you're a little fatigued, once you're beaten down, that's kind of the way to do it. The other rule of thumb is that the shorter the effort, the more sets you can do, right? Take into account 30 by 30s. That's 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off. I'm gonna do that for 10 minutes, and then I would do another set of that. So that's 20 on efforts, but it's only 30 seconds on the on effort, right? You wouldn't do 30 efforts of a 10-minute interval. It's like a 3-hour work, and this is not gonna work. So the shorter effort warrants more sets. The longer the effort, like a 20-minute effort, you know, if I'm doing a 20-minute on effort, I usually only do 2 of those. That would be, you know, pretty rare to do more than that. My coach, Tony Wolf, is probably gonna get a little mad that I'm gonna show you this.
This pisses me off.
Because it's his intellectual property. But here is my workout from yesterday. This is it. This is the whole shebang. You can see that I have a ramp up and into sort of like a warm up, followed by a workout, then with sort of like a middle cool down period, and then another set, and then a final cool down. He's gotten really good at sort of making these changes in pace, but my overall power is just, you know, I'm always pushing on the pedals. So how you could structure a workout is build some sort of warm up into it while you're pushing on the pedals, keeping it zone 2 or 3 heart rate, more like zone 2, right? Working into it. Then you're gonna identify what part of the power curve that's not great for you, right? So let's say that your 6-minute power, your 5 to 6 minute power is just not that good. You're getting dropped in crits because it's pinned, it's so hard for a little bit, and you just, man, can't last for those big long surges. So you would then do, say, 3 minutes on at the power you would like to hold for 6 minutes. So let's say you want to be able to hold 300 watts for 6 minutes. Well, then you're going to be holding maybe 300 to 340 for 3 minutes, a minute and a half to 2 minutes off recovery, and do that between 3 and 7 sets. You can't do intervals every single day.
Well, it depends.
It's not, you're going to build up fatigue to a point where you can no longer hit those power numbers that are stressing adaptation. Remember, an interval, the whole idea of an interval is to do power that you wouldn't usually be able to do for a sustained time. I do, 2 structured interval training sessions a week. That's including probably racing on the weekends or big group rides on the weekends and that sort of thing. But my body it's responding to these stresses well. Other people might not have that ability, especially if you're very new into riding. Man, 1 training session a week, 1 interval session a week might be all that you can ask your body to do. 1 to 3 a week, depending on how many hours you have to assign. That'd be good. Recovery period is usually a day, right? So my program consistently has had me do intervals on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then the weekend is something else. Sometimes I'll have intervals, but they're bigger intervals, doing 20-minute, 30-minute type intervals on the weekends, or just really sustaining hard efforts for a long period of time on the weekends. So I have Monday, Wednesday, and Friday are usually easier days or recovery days. Another school of thought, though, is to bunch those together and go Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. You're having structured workouts and the rest are recovery. You kind of need to figure out what that looks like for your schedule. If you only have Tuesdays and Wednesdays to ride and then you can't ride again until Saturday, well, then you would want to probably do back-to-back interval sessions Tuesday and Wednesday, since you'll have adequate recovery for the rest of the week. Let's talk about something that's super important, though, and I probably should have led off on the video with this, is during your interval training, you're gonna fail sometimes, okay? You're gonna fail. And if you fail all the time, then your zones are wrong. You should fail sometimes, but not always. It should feel not deathly hard in the first 1 or 2 sets. It should feel very difficult at the end. But if you are just like about to puke on your first set, your zones are off. You're trying to overreach too much. But let's say I'm looking at high zone 4, low zone 5. This is where I want to hit each one of those intervals. But let's say on the 3rd interval, I'm horrible. I just bonk, I crack, it's no good. I'm gonna go out and try my 4th one. Okay, and sometimes maybe it was just a bad one and I can get back up into that power zone. But if I no longer am able to sustain that zone, if my goal is, say, 350 watts for the effort and I'm down at 320, 300, I'm calling it. I'm done. I'm no longer working out. I'm just building fatigue. So you have to really monitor how you're doing during the effort. Your power shouldn't be all over the place, or your heart rate zone shouldn't be all over the place. It should be very linear, straight across the board, within, a little bit of variant. But for example, I had 7 efforts between 360 and 380. I went out and I did 380 for, for 4 minutes. Did 380 for 4 minutes. I did 380 for 4 minutes again. And then I did 370, 370, and 371. That was my 5 efforts. That's great. That's perfect. I'm totally in that zone. Problem was, on the 6th one, I did 350. I just was not able to hold the power, which was fine. I mean, I was prescribed to do 5 to 7 sets, so I had a successful workout. But since I did 370 on my 5th one, it's like, well, I could probably still keep going. Did my 6th set, failed at 350, took a little bit extra recovery and tried to do my 7th set, and it just wasn't happening. I mean, I was like 300 to 320 watts, wasn't going on. So I'm not going to keep doing 4 minutes at a power that isn't what I need to be at. I'm just gonna call it, end it, done. Move on to the next day. And if I fail a workout, utterly fail, which I have done, man, it's not that big of a deal. Regroup, come at it again, it's all right. So let's talk about when to put interval training into your yearly program. We're looking at the entire thing. Usually on a year program, you're gonna have your preseason, your season, and your postseason. For me, postseason will have 0 intervals. I'm going to fall back in love with riding. I'm going to enjoy it. I have had a long year, no interval training for postseason. Preseason, I will slowly start to work into something. Leading into the season, I have lower intensity, longer efforts as my intervals. And then I will move into season and I will drop the length of those intervals, but increase the intensity. The idea behind this is to hopefully mitigate building up a ton of fatigue during race season. And obviously, while you're racing, you want to really exercise those higher parts of your zones, working on your VO2 max and your maximal output and that sort of thing. Then there'll be a point in the on season where I sort of take a break, have fun, go on big epic rides to Yosemite. I'm still training, as in that I'm getting in the volume and I'm racing a lot, so my high end is still there. But just as like pure structure sort of takes a little bit of a break, kind of let the heart recover, and then I'll go back into another hardcore block of training with intervals towards the later part of the on season. Consistency is a big key to this, right? You can't do one interval training session tomorrow and never again for the next 3 months. It's not gonna make any sense, it's not gonna do anything for you. You need consistent time in the zone you want to improve over and over and over again so that your body's like, okay, dude, we get it. You wanna be strong, we'll adapt. But you gotta force it to adapt, and it's gonna suck. It's not gonna feel great, but it shouldn't feel horrible. When you go out and race, or you're just on the rivet and you're zone 800.
No, that's not a thing.
That's stressing this one piece of your zone, of your motor. When you have your zone set right and you're training low zone 4, it feels weirdly easy. That's how it should be. It shouldn't feel like you're dying every single effort. You should be able to work into that effort. First one feels like you could do way more. The last one feels like, oh my God, I can barely do this. But your power and your effort is very straight across the board, despite what your perceived exertion is. Keep it consistent, drill those pedals, get stronger. Interval training, it's what you do, man. As always, vegan cyclist. Yeah.